Greenwalt. I'm a native of Texas. I was born in Dallas, Texas. I didn't come from money, but I came from creativity. My father was a jeweler. My mom was a poet. My dad would do crazy things like build boats in the driveway. Because he was a jeweler, because I grew up in this environment, where there's always had access to a jewelry shop. So when I was a little kid, I thought my father made money because that's what my mom said. And then because at that time it was a big fad to take like old, coins and turn them into jewelry. And so he was doing that for a while. And and I grew up in a wood shop and constantly building things, my father was always involved in it. So the other kids knew how to throw footballs, and I knew how to use a hammer. So when I would go to my best friend's house, to spend the night or whatever, his dad would always put me on projects, building fences and stuff like that. So, because I was really good at it, But we have another. Oh, welcome. You're not ready.
The middle out.
And so I always had all these materials available to me. I always had paper. I always had crayons. I was always making stuff. And then my father, he was always involving me in projects, but I never knew where he was going with anything. He was extremely introverted, probably autistic, probably shell-shocked from his experiences in the Second World War. So we would just be starting a project. He would just say, attach this here, let's put in this row of nails, blah, 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 we're gonna put a hinge in here. And I'm like, where's the blueprint for this thing? Like, what are we even doing with this? So like my own artwork, you're not late. No, one chair left. So just like my own artwork, I never knew where it was going to go. So one of the things that I'm doing with all of these pieces is I am allowing kind of an extreme level of unpredictability to come into the work, and so I invite that. So I feel like when I'm working on artwork, I'm dreaming. If I work really late on something, if I'm staying up late at night, and I think it's a curious phenomenon, but let's say I get 2 or 3 hours sleep, and Paul, you're not late. And so I feel like I'm dreaming on the panel. So if I show up, sorry, my boss just walked in. So if I show up at school, with having slept 3 hours, if I've been drawing, I don't feel really tired. I think my hypothesis is that my dreamer has had a chance to express itself. So at best, if I'm drawing, it feels like I'm watching my hands, and I'm just kind of a gardener. And so I'm growing things. So I like gardening metaphors, that imagery grows out of kind of a prepared surface or a soil that's been prepared through letting things grow and decay, and the previous year crop becomes the nutrients for the next year's crop. So So the imagery is always kind of going extinct, but there's always something that's coming out of that. So I'm constantly not really destroying the work, but it's kind of destroying the work. So so even if I'm working on paper, like pretty much now everything, if I'm using paper, it's almost always like 100% cotton fiber, mixed media paper or something, because I'm pretty aggressive with the paper. Like I erase a lot. I don't like the term eraser. An eraser oftentimes, and Mari can probably say this because you're a teacher, and Clara, that when a student uses an eraser, they think they're getting rid of something. Whereas I'm just pushing it back into the womb and let it gestate a little more. So, and I regard the picture frame as a womb. These are the picture plane divides this world from a fictive space behind the picture plane, and so I regard my job as to be sort of like a midwife. And so then what I'm doing is I'm trying to pull things out of the pictorial womb, and so just like a midwife, just like a mother, you don't really know what you're going to get. You get what you get, and you know, with an eraser, you can push it back into the womb and let it gestate in there some more. You know, or there's cooking metaphors. You know, you can put it back in the oven for a while, or you can take a dish, and after a couple days, you can take your pizza and you can cut it up and eat it later as part of a salad. So I also like the idea of fishing metaphors. You know, so my partner Mayuko, you may not know, fantastic artist, and she's a good artist. But what you probably don't know is she's a fantastic fisherman. Wow. Like, she's real specific about it, you know, it's like, I need a flounder, you know. And so, but fishing is a wonderful metaphor for the drawing process. I think years ago I had an exhibition called Dream Fishing, and so the idea being, you know, here's this surface, which in itself defines the sublime, and so there's something under there, you know, there's things under there, and so again, you kind of get what you get, you know, unless you're a Mayuko, you know, and being like, oh, you know, it's like, so it's a process of kind of running a program. To do this, I have to be extremely tolerant of the things that come up. And I understand that the imagery is very unusual, but I wouldn't say that it's abnormal. I think that having grown up with a best friend who was impacted anatomically by a lot of anatomical anomalies. Back in the 60s, people would have said he was deformed. And to be deformed, you have to be formed first, you know. So I don't think he was deformed. I think he was just formed, you know. And that's the nature of biology, and that's the nature of life. And so the one thing that we can say about humans is that there's a huge amount of variety with this, and so now I'm very sensitive to oftentimes in movies, for example, well, who's the hero? It's the good-looking guy. Who's the villain? You know, it's the one that looks like they've contracted tertiary civils. You know, and so that's just the nature of, you know, so I'm sort of questioning this idea about monstrousness. What is a monster? And then who teaches us this, you know? And so, Lydia's here. Oh, there's Lydia. I did this for you, Lydia. I did include at least one monster in this exhibition. I have a little portrait of Vladimir Putin here. So I did that just for Lydia. And
deformed.
well, and here's the thing. I've never seen him. You've never seen him. We have seen memes. We've seen photographs. Have you seen him? No. So I'm very sensitive to this idea that in pictures, nothing's real. You know, there's not, that's the title of the exhibition, I Spot, I Spot. You know, these, if you see a nose, you know, that nose will never be there because it's flat. There's not a circulatory, there's no brain in that thing, there's no circulation, there's no internal organs. So when I'm making these things, I almost feel like sometimes I'm blowing glass or balloon animals, or they're kind of hollow, they're kind of sculptural. So where they become alive is not on the picture plane, but in the minds of people who are willing, humans, we're good at this, to suspend our disbelief. And we do this when we watch movies. Oh, there goes Thor, and he's throwing the hammer, you know, and then we, you know, and it's like we can enter into this fantasy world that these things are happening, and it's believable. My only other possible monster that I've included, and I don't even know that much about him. So Fritz Haber. So I did a portrait of Fritz Haber. I didn't really do a portrait of Fritz Haber. I did a drawing based on a photograph in a Wikipedia article. You know, like, does Fritz Haber have legs? No, it's a two-dimensional photograph. Anyway, so Fritz Haber was what are we up to on the people on this earth? Was it like 7 billion now? Didn't we cross some kind of it? Was 6 now? It's 7. How come? Because of that guy. He's the one that invented fertilizer. And so he figured out the process to take, when plants grow, they're blind to the nitrogen. It's all around them in the air. They can't utilize it. So he figured out the process to take nitrogen from, well, petroleum products and use that for crops. So he's the one that's responsible for the population explosion on the earth. But he also invented an insecticide. So here he was, you know, wanting to do good in the world. And so the other problems that farmers have are the insects. So he invented a very effective insecticide called Cyclone B. And that's what was used on the Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, intellectuals, in the extermination camps, German extermination camps, Nazi extermination camps. So I'm interested in those kinds of conflicts. But most of the time that I'm working, the figuration is synthetic. So I'm just putting things together. The other thing I didn't tell you about my childhood is that, you know, I think as a baby boomer, what did I have that no other child ever had on the planet? I had thousands of toys, little plastic things. everywhere. Everything's plastic, you know, they're just like, I know somewhere there's a landfill level that's just filled with these things, you know, and Legos and all this stuff. And even then, it's like I was modifying toys and stitching them together and making my own stuff. And so these figures are very synthetic, and sometimes I get into this mode where I think I'm like playing with a Mr. Potato Head. Did y'all ever have a Mr. Potato Head? You know, you're like, you stick things on, you know, and you try to figure things out. So, so I spot. So, you know, that's the biological principle of mimicry. It sounds better than saying I spot, mouth spot, you know, so they're not really, one of the things that I think we should be teaching our students in the arts, you know, is this difference, especially now that with AI. And I don't know whether to be bothered now that AI has learned what I do so well. But this distinction between realism and reality. And so there's, for example, narratives that, these violent video games that our children are playing, they're so violent, and they're making our children inured to the violence in the world, and we're teaching our children how to be active shooters and so on, you know. And but that's not true. But video games are never violent. The violence in a video game is realism. It's not reality. A truly violent game would be football or boxing or hockey. You know, nobody was ever worried about those before, you know, but instead they're coming after the artist. You know, it's like, oh, this stuff is, so I think it's very important, this distinction, for us to see what's real and what's not real. The upside down figures, the ones that can be rotated, really that came about because of the design of these panels. So if you, so they're pleated on both ends. There's no pleat on the sides. And when I'm working on them, I'm always rotating them, like an engraver. If you watch traditional engravers, they're always working on. So an engraver, they hold the tool in the same place and they rotate the plate. So I'm completely used to working on things upside down. It's one of the things I've noticed with beginning students, they'll never work on something upside down because it's ergonomic, you know, so you have to be able to get your hands in the little nooks and crannies, and and then it's always good practice to look at compositions upside down and so on. So since, for example, you know, if you give a figure legs, well, what are the legs for? To go where? You know, there's no narrative, there's no spatial context narrative where these figures need legs or anything. So I'm very much have this appeal to allow the drawings to float and drift, and by stripping away the context, they don't have I don't know what size they are. Sometimes in my mind they're microscopic, sometimes they're the size of galaxies, and they're just budding off new galaxies. So this one I started way back during COVID, and I did lift the head from a photograph of a minor country musician who was coming to Lamarck, and we got something in the mail. And so I started with that portrait, and then I'm always interested in drifting, so that the image is always going to drift and mutate and modify. And I don't want to fix it from the beginning. if you want to mess up a kid, tell them when they're 2 years old they're going to be a lawyer or you know. So I don't want to impose the end at the beginning. So I started with that, and then as I developed it, it was becoming racially ambiguous, which I thought was fun. And then I gave it a little bacteria here with its spiral flagellum. Oh, I'm also very much interested in biology. I started off not as in college, not as an artist, but studying biology. And so their flagellum, it doesn't do this. Under the microscope, it looks like it's doing this, like a fish, but what it's really doing is their flagellum is a corkscrew, because the water at that scale is extremely viscous. You like swimming through concrete, so they have to screw themselves through the water. Anyway, so it was COVID era, and so I imagined this cowboy, and it could go into the bloodstream, grab the, I know it's a virus, not a bacteria.
We'll talk a little bit about this one.
That one, I had gone on sabbatical, and part of my sabbatical was to learn some digital media, and so I started playing with Procreate. And so I started a drawing on this panel, and after it developed for a while, I photographed it, and then I took that photograph and I put it into Procreate. And for a while, I was, whatever the rule was on that one, if I did it in the physical version, I would do the same thing in the digital version. And if I did something in the digital version, I would have to do it in the physical version. So what I was trying to do is make sisters, a sister, companion sister image. It was driving me crazy. I kind of, because I was doing everything twice. And then I would forget. It's like, wait a minute, didn't I already resolve this issue? And it was just ended up in here. So it actually slowed me down for a while. So in general, there is a four-dimensional aspect to all these pieces, and that's the time aspect that goes into it. So unlike a photograph, which is instantaneous, you know, all those mark-making systems are they have to develop in time and all those layers. So the other thing that happened when I was working on that, and I'm never working on just one piece either, but while I was working on that, I had, as part of my sabbatical, I'd never been to Europe, so I went to Amsterdam, a little side trip to Paris. And so being in the Rijksmuseum, you know, of course I'm in awe of Netherlandish artists. I like the Northern Renaissance better than the Italian Renaissance, for example. So Netherlandish painters, and then when they break away from Spain, then you get into the Dutch Republic. But, you know, just technically for what they're doing, of course, I think the subject matter is super boring in those things. You know, they're princes and you know, the usual portraiture and, you know, and occasional religious themes and so on. But wow, the technicality of that. So in terms of process, I am extensively glazing and scumbling. So the glazes are transparent layers, and with glazing you get this wonderful atmosphere and color complexity and mood and transparency. And then the opaque layers, the scumbles are truly the eraser, because it's an opaque layer that you can't see through. And then there, of course, language is a problem, so there's everything in between. So layering, scumbling, carving, using the negative shape to carve into the positive shape. I use frequently sanding, for example, where if I'm building up layers and I'm also putting down isolation codes. And some of these panels, the square ones, ones, those are on 5x5 Baltic birch, also known as Russian birch. Somewhere there's a beautiful birch forest that's disappearing, and I don't care. So there's no voids in the plywood, and then I laminate linen on top of that. So before I even start, it's an object, and so I was thinking I might fall in love with digital media. Not quite. There's some really cool stuff about it, no doubt. But it's got no surface, and I love surfaces. So I like the physicality of the surface. So, and then one of the things that the linen does is when I'm drawing on it, it feels like paper, so it's slightly squishier. Whereas if you draw on ampersand panels, they click when you draw on them. They're super hard. So I like the idea too that the figures endure. We won't, but they do. And in that sense, they're immortal. Not from a religious sense, not from a spiritual sense, just from the fact that these figures, they don't have souls. They will tolerate anything you want to do to them. Anything. You want to practice an amputation? No problem. You want to say, I wonder what would happen. What would happen if I cut the top of the head off and grew a new head coming out there? You know, whatever. So, because I don't relate to them at all as people, as persons, you know, I'm kind of free with that. And again, going back to Hollywood, I'm very sensitive, and my art has been used that way in the past, but I don't know if you see like true crime or whatever, you know, and it's like, and the detectives, they're like chasing down the antagonist, this someone who does despicable, repugnant things, murders, dismembering bodies, and so on. It's just terrible. And they finally track him down to his lair, and he's got his basement. Well, what's in the basement? All of this weird artwork. It's like, oh yeah, he's guilty for sure. Look at his artwork. Yeah, it's got. I worked on a film project way back. I'm not going to tell you what it is. It was so bad. And pre-video. And so the director's father, we had to stash some of the artwork that I developed for the film, and about this troubled artist. And so the director's father is a very traditional Egyptian dude. And he's like, I don't want this in my house. He says, whoever did this is a sick person. And Mark David was like, no, he's just he's a normal guy. He's got a family, you know, and he said, well, maybe so. Turn it around so I wouldn't have to look at it. So I'm aware that people are affected by artwork. I'm affected by it. You know, it's like if I see a horror film, I don't really like horror films because I get tricked into being sucked up into all of that stuff, you know. So what I do, to turn it off, I have to look at scene transitions and lighting and cinematography, those kind of things. So, oh yeah, so my recent favorite discovery, as you all know, Wikipedia is the finest educational tool ever created. The Makapansgat pebble. I don't know if that's what you say.
What?
Makapansgat. it's a region, so this pebble, it's got a little face on it. And it's actually multiple faces. And if you turn it upside down, you get another little face out of it. Now you get a smiley face, and sometimes the nostrils, you can read them as the eyes, or the eyes can be the eyebrows or whatever. And so it's a manuport. So this is the most famous manuport. But manuports, when you're walking down the beach, you pick up a shell. Oh, cool shell. You put it in your pocket. Well, in the act of doing that, it becomes symbolic. Why would you pick up that shell and not that shell? Why would you pick this up and not that? So there's something symbolic about that already. And of course, in the 20th century, who was the most famous person for that? Marcel Duchamp, because he buys a urinal and turns the urinal into art just by putting it on a pedestal. Anyway, so this pebble was carried from a site like 30 kilometers away, something like that, brought it back to their home. And for some reason, they picked this thing up, but was this collected by a Homo sapien? No. Was it collected by a Homo neanderthalensis? No. A Denisovan? No. A Homo erectus? No. Homo habilis? No. This was collected by an Australopithecine. So it's 3 million years old, almost. And so, so when we're looking for the first work of art, this is probably it that we know of. Where do we find the first work of art? So it says it's a pebble with natural chipping and wear patterns that make it look like a crude rendition of a human face. If anyone wants to go into Wikipedia and change something, I'm not sure if it is a crude rendition of a human face, because I'm not sure if humans got invented yet. Because it's Australopithecus africanus, it's not Homo. Homo means human. So the most famous one was Lucy, of course. And Lucy answered the question, did humans get did we stand up first, or did we get big brains first? We stood up first. And now we found lots of Australopithecine fossils, but never anything that might have been a work of art. So when we're looking for this initial spark of the imagination, it's a possibility. So when I work, I listen to a lot of YouTube and music, and what I discovered in YouTube is that if I'm drawing, I can listen to the worst lectures about anything, like really terrible, poorly presented, poorly videoed, poorly edited, all of that stuff. And and this is a trick that I learned in college when I was a biology major. I quit taking notes. I started drawing instead, and what I discovered was, because whatever they're saying is in the textbook anyway. So I couldn't write fast enough. So if I'm drawing, I become a really good listener. And this is another problem I have with public education for sure, is that if a student's drawing, the teacher thinks that they're not paying attention. And what does the student do? Is they're sitting there pretending like they're paying attention when they're really thinking about porn. And once you see the code, anyway, so now when I look at drawings from old sketchbooks and things, often I know exactly where I was, what I was listening to. The pictures have nothing to do with any of that. So once you see the code, have y'all ever seen The Matrix?
Yeah.
I love The Matrix. The first one, The so in the Matrix, I think it's a metaphor for art. Because the protagonist, Neo, once he sees the code, he can manipulate the code. So, because nothing's real. And yeah, so if I look at pornography, it's definitely, I'm seeing something totally different than what my mother might see. Because my mother can only relate to subject matter. She doesn't see negative shape. She doesn't see pixelation. She doesn't see a frame, for example. So, and then one of my favorite paintings is the Athenaeum painting by George Washington by Gilbert Stuart. It's the Athenaeum portrait. It's the one that's the basis for the epistemic reference for the dollar bill image. So the dollar bill image, therefore, is a meme, and because it's an idea that's been reproduced by humans. And but what I love about this painting, y'all can look it up. It's on Wikipedia, Athenaeum portrait, Gilbert Stuart, George Washington. But it's an unfinished painting. But it's a finished, unfinished painting. So I like the unfinished quality in a lot of the work. It's perfectly complete, it's perfectly balanced. That's always what I'm doing, is try to achieve completion, balance, for whatever stage that completion is, because when it's born, it's infantile, and all births are messy, it's a gesture drawing. So that's like, it's just messy. And the messiness of this is because I started it on an airplane in turbulence. So, and I had this ink pen, and with the pressurization in the cabin, my ink pen had exploded. And I'm sitting there drinking my Bloody Mary, and I've got black all over my hands. And I'm like touching paper, and the person that's next to me is like, what's going on over here? And then later I reworked it some. So the unfinished quality is intentional, and for me it symbolizes continuity. That they're not locked, they can still grow. Questions?
Yes, I have a question about this. I think your private statement is very well written.
ChatGPT. No, just kidding. I didn't really use it, but it's cool.
So there's this spheroidal figure on notes. I'm reading about this one. Yeah. So this one seems to be a little different, because I think you're referencing more depth, and there maybe because of the notes written. I'm just curious as to where this note came from, or how this figure. What do you mean by spheroid?
So again, Paul, my chair is here, so I have to. So
okay.
Do we ever have to attend meetings that may or may not enrich our lives? Or the lives of our students, right? You know, so yeah, I'll sit there and maybe I'll write a few things down. Well, then what's going to happen? You know, it's like note taking. I'm start drawing pictures and stuff on top of it. So I'm not even sure if I own this technically, because the state of Texas says that if you're using their air conditioning, and I'm taking notes and I'm getting paid by the state, well, technically, I think they own my notes.
Wow.
Is this true, Paul? There's a gray area in there. Right. So I'm always very careful to use my own paper, my own pens, and things like that. But and I've sold my notes before. This is actually an exercise for a drawing, for a life drawing course.
I can't figure it.
So it's where you highly simplify volumes and just turn things into like major masses and spheroidals and cylinders and simplified forms like that. And Cambiasso did it with cubes, and so I'm doing it with these. There's nothing new about it, but then to put in to synthesize a light reference. And you know this drawing was done after 1450 because I have reflected light in there. That reflected light is an invention of the Renaissance because that's where you get the birth of physics. That's where you get the birth of anatomical information through direct observation. We started this stuff. I say we artists. And so when you go to the surgeon and they know how to find their way around in a human body, it wasn't the physicians who started that, it was the artists. And in the same way in physics, how does light behave? And then for the first time, they're grinding lenses, so now they can look up, they can look down, you can get old. And so I got my academic contour hatching going on, and so it's convenient for overlapping and for synthesizing a light source. And you know I was born after 450 BCE, because that was the Credos boy, because the weight is shifted onto one leg. This is contrapposto, the medial malleolus of the tibia has to line up underneath the sternal notch. So an old formula that's gone back to the ancient Greeks, before the classical Greeks even. 480 was the Thermopylae and all that stuff. Yeah, I like having the holes in the paper to show that it comes from sketchbooks. Questions? Any other questions?
It's more of a comment. I mean, as a gallerist, aside from that, I have always loved your work.
Oh, thank you.
But this piece here on this wall next to the door, your detail to anatomy is so apparent in that painting. And I just love it.
Oh, thank you. It's for
I mean,
sale.
I know. But I think, a gallery shouldn't ever say, oh, this one's my favorite. But I will have to admit, that is my favorite piece out of the show. I feel like the figures are dancing. But anatomically, it's just so, it just takes my breath away.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, that one, it really does a good job of getting those figures to feel like they're rotating.